Hello and welcome to Clickbait, and today we've got something a little bit different because I'm not at home, I'm in Rotterdam and I'm on a boat. And this is quite interesting actually because, well, unrelated, turns out that building over there is the Holland or Dutch Photography Museum, which I'm probably going to try and visit in a little while. However, today I've got a little bit of a challenge going on because I'm on board a new ship called the Cunard, which is one of Cunard's fleet. And the thing about Cunard is that unlike the big sort of floating holiday camp type lines, they do everything to look a bit like the heyday of the ocean liners. So back in the 1930s, 40s, when everything was kind of Art Deco, mid-century styled. And that's kind of classy, it's kind of nice. However, you take a photo with a modern camera or your camera phone, you don't quite get the full effect of it. So I've brought on board a couple of different cameras to see if using cameras of, well, the era they're trying to replicate gives the feelings of the photos that you're trying to replicate. So I've brought on board this is a 1950s Agfa medium format, so 12 shots and a couple of rolls of film just to see if we can do anything with that. I've also brought on board a Minolta X700, but that's fitted with a 1966 lens, so that gives a mid-century feel. But to see if it's the lens or the sensor that makes a difference, I've also brought on board a Nikon Z6 and an MD adapter, so see if we get the same kind of effect with the digital camera shooting the old lens as we do with the old camera shooting the old lens on film. Right, let's go take some photos. So in my quest to try and figure out if it's possible to create an image that looks like it was shot by a tourist 60 or 70 years ago on old cameras, with old cameras in a new environment that looks old, if that makes sense, I basically packed more cameras than clothes for the day or so I was on board this ship. So the first thing I'm shooting with is the Agfa Isola, which I was really very, very surprised how good it is and how clear the lens is. The dirt and detritus you can see in the images is basically down to me just scanning it, well, not scanning it, putting the negatives on the light box and just photographing it with a digital camera. It is a very easy camera to use and really enjoyable to use as well. It's very simple in so much as that you've got a wind on lever which does not have lockout, and there's a tiny window aperture hole, if you like, in the top plate next to the shutter button which goes red when you've depressed the shutter, so you know you have shot a frame. So that should go some way to help you avoid double exposure. So you need to work out some kind of methodology so that you know that I'm going to shoot the thing that I'm not going to wind on until I'm ready to shoot, or I'm going to wind on, ready to shoot, then push the button, and just make up your own rules. So it's very easy to double expose or wind on too far and waste film. So you have to be super careful with the numbers on the back, which you can see through the little window on the back of it. When it comes to settings, you have no ISO control because there's no light meter. So you have to use your phone or an external meter of some kind in order to gauge how bright things are. Or just use the old lick and wind test. You never know, you might figure it out. For travel, the lens compresses in, but then you pop it out and it locks for shooting, and it should lock the shutter out, so you shouldn't be able to take a picture when it's compressed, hopefully. At the front of the lens, we've got our focus. It's a rangefinder, so it's not coupled, so you need to measure, pace, guess, do what you got to do to wind that into roughly the right distance. And we've got a range of 3.5 or 3 feet up to infinity and beyond, so you need to figure that one out for yourself. The other two controls are, of course, aperture. Its widest open is f6.3 and its furthest closed down is f11, so not a huge range. It's not fixed on those two things, so you do have a certain amount of leniency in between there, but not a lot of room to play with. And on the other side of the barrel, you've got your shutter. You've got B for bulb up to 1/100th of a second, so again, not a huge amount of range. 100th of a second is pretty slow. So in bright conditions, you really are fighting the thing to get things dark enough. Thank you to Analog Wonderland ambassador Heather, who loaned me this camera for this trip. Next up was older camera with vintage lens. So this is my Minolta X300S, which is a 1980s camera. So it's a manual camera, manual wind on. You've got aperture priority and you've got shutter priority, so there's a certain amount of modernity just there. But the MD mount goes back a long time, and this is my rather lovely f1.4 58mm, which is described by some as a bokeh monster, depending how you pronounce that word. And this I had in mind to be my favourite lens of the trip. I could have taken a more modern MD zoom lens from, I guess, the 80s or possibly early 90s to add a bit more flexibility, but I really wanted to be focusing on that period look and feel going back to the 1950s. This is a 1966 lens, which is kind of the end of the golden age of the liner and the beginning of the new age of cruising, if you're into that kind of thing. The QE2 was launched around this time. The old Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth were taken out of service. The old Queens with their pure Art Deco interiors were going away, and the new Queen QE2 was coming in with its amazing mid-century. So that's why the Queen Anne is kind of a bit of a mixture of these two styles. A bit of Art Deco, a bit of mid-century, and this lens, for that reason, fits the bill perfectly. This camera I loaded with Kentmere 100, a nice simple black and white film that should be in harmony for this particular setup. Now, getting a little bit more modern, but still keeping with the film theme, this is my Minolta Dynax 7000i. This is also a 1980s favourite, so it's a little bit more modern, but still technically vintage now, believe it or not. And that's fitted with a 35-70 short zoom on it. And this camera though is loaded with something a bit interesting, Cinestill 800T. So it's not that dissimilar from that Mr. Negative tungsten film that I shot and I did a review on not so long ago, in that it gives that really interesting punchy kind of 1950s 60s magazine look. And so again, that particular roll of film with this camera in theory should give us a bit of that nice mid-century look that we're going for. Finally, bringing us bang up to date and giving us a bit of a benchmark, the Nikon Z6 II fitted with the 24-120, which is not my everyday work lens, but it's a brilliant travel lens because it's such an all-encompassing focal range. It's only an f4, not an f2.8, but again, for travel, it's lots of range, it's nice and light, and it gives really lovely sharp results. But you can tell a digital picture, so I invested in this from Earth, which is an MD to Nikon Z adapter, which means I can put my Minolta MD lenses onto my Nikon Z cameras. And so with this range of cameras, we can see if the effect of shooting an old looking subject in the present day and getting an old-fashioned look is going to come from the old camera, the old lens, the film stock, the sensor, the glass, who knows. This is going to give us every possible connotation of shooting something vintage looking but it's actually modern in the modern day and getting that kind of look for it. Because don't forget, back in 1960, for example, someone going on holiday, it was fresh and it was new and it was exciting, and they were taking things as if it was fresh and new and exciting. They weren't trying to get a retro feel, that was just the feel. There is one little fly in the ointment which I will mention right now, and it's this one. This is the fly in the ointment, because we have got some fantastic pictures from the 1950s Agfa, we've got some great shots from the 1980s Minolta, and lots of good stuff from the 2020s Nikon. However, representing the old mechanical flavour of Minolta, we had a little bit of a failure. Unfortunately, my roll of film came out like this. Turns out the shutter was not working properly, but because the mirror was firing, it sounded like it was working. It's a horizontal plane shutter, and one blade goes ahead and opens and the second one follows to close. The first one opened correctly and then the second one closed but then dragged. So we got a moment of correctly exposed image and then the rest of it was ruined. So we have no 35mm film with 1960s lens. So I was really disappointed about that. But luckily we did have the Earth adapter, so we did have some shots with this lens, and we'll see how they turned out in a minute. So that was £40 well spent the day before we left. Exploring the decks of the ship, there's too much to choose from when it came to pointing a camera at things, with only 24 frames to choose from. It's lucky I had the other cameras to pick as well. Designers have done a spectacular job of blending Art Deco mid-century designs and gave the whole place a feel of being somewhere slightly out of time. But one of my favourite places to shoot was this, the Grand Lobby. It covers 3 decks in height, has a spiral staircase and a massive full-height mural which actually flips between 3 different images as you walk from left to right around it. It's the perfect place to start, but although it looks quite bright on the video, it's actually fairly dark in camera terms. Using my phone as a meter, it turned out it's going to be quite tricky hand holding here. I was going to need some extra support. And shooting it here with the older camera, you do get the feel this was taken a long time ago. It's a classic seagoing image on a seagoing environment, and it just looks like it was shot a long time ago. It doesn't look like it was taken in the last couple of years. But with a fixed focal length of 75mm, which is about 50mm or so in 35mm terms, it's quite hard to get it all into one shot. You can't really get far enough away with this particular focal length. But that spiral staircase is there to be enjoyed. Dropping down a deck, you can get a different angle on the same thing, and thankfully I brought my little tabletop tripod as well. And down on the lowest deck, we could actually look up through some other things to get a bit of depth, build some excitement into the image. I tried shooting some of the lower deck lobbies and stairwells because it was quite an interesting environment, but it was so dark I couldn't quite get a shutter speed down low enough without the aid of a tripod, and these didn't really come out. This area was the pub with its amazing park glass wall. We actually got some great pictures from a different film for a different project, but what I really wanted to shoot was this mirror, but I never found a really satisfactory angle to shoot it from. It's just really nice to walk past in the end. But these curving stairs, which deserve more of my time in front of a camera, take you up to this rather interesting bar with the multi-level illuminated base, but this leads you back to the spiral staircase with its also interesting ceiling and lighting arrangement, and this deserved a photo. Again though, it does look like it was shot about 70 years ago. Carrying on this way takes you to the outside world, and this is one of the best things about being on a ship. Being able to step outside and walk out and look at the sea and feel the air. It's also a great opportunity to take a picture because it's different every time you look. The sea is always changing, and if you don't mind sticking your camera over the side, you can get some pretty interesting shots. Fortunately, it's a fair bit brighter outside here now, so I can extend the Agfa, wind the focus to infinity, set it to f11 and 100th of a second, which is as bright as we can go. And again, it looks and feels like a picture that was taken, shortly after the Second World War. It doesn't look like a picture that was taken a couple of weeks ago. I have to admit, I did find this kind of view pretty captivating. I spent a bit too long looking over the edge with all of the cameras really, shooting it as many times as I could, even though obviously it does look a little bit similar each time. So we can compare the shots with all the different models of camera. Hiking back round the promenade deck, incidentally 3 times round I think it was, is an entire mile, so you can take your morning run out here breathing the sea air if you want to. And of course other people are out here as well, and they can become our street photography subjects. It turns out you can do street photography on a camera this old. Now this is one of the best places to stand on the ship, the stern area looking out in the wind over the sea as we sail into the distance, or back towards England anyway. And it's a great place to shoot the sea from because you can stand here and the sea is framed by these great big picture windows, and it has the handrail as an extra bit of depth to it as well. We do get very different pictures though shooting it on different cameras, but of course with limited to a deep depth of field we get everything in focus. For shooting on the newer cameras we can open the aperture so much wider and we can throw the foreground out of focus and just focus on the sea and the horizon. Heading back indoors to try and find some more of these fantastic interiors which give that old time feel. It was noticeably darker again, so hand holding was really a little bit more tricky, so needing a bit of support from the passing chair, and in fact every other shot I shot inside here needed a bit more help just to keep things nice and steady. Looking through the window, looking at the bars, the images do have that amazing feel of being shot a long time ago. The negatives were nice and bright and clear, although you can see where I underexposed dramatically because I couldn't get the shutter speed down far enough without the tripod or the bulb setting. Lost a couple of frames here and there. And of course, I did wind past 1 or 2 and lose the shots completely, which did limit my shooting ability even further. Curiously though, one of the best shots on the entire roll, which really does capture the flavour in a unique montage style, was this inadvertent semi-double exposure, and I didn't quite roll the film on far enough. And so we've got the ship's name on a bench on one side, we've got the lifeboats and people on the promenade deck on the other, and they've just blended in an almost natural way. But because of that sharp edge between the two, it again has that slightly older, more slightly primitive look that even professional work from so long ago does tend to have. Then I headed out with a Minolta X300S, and as you can see, things didn't quite go to plan. There would have been some really good shots, some great shots of the ship, some great street photography style pictures of other passengers, but we were slightly denied this one, so we shall move swiftly on to our next contender, the 7000i loaded with a cine still. Now this is a really interesting look because, like with the Mr. Negative, it gives the feel of something that was shot in the mid to late 20th century. If you can avoid shots that have got clothes in or anything too obviously modern, it does have a feel of something that was shot maybe 40 plus years ago, which is sort of what we're looking for. So this combination of a 1980s lens and a modern but old style film stock do seem to work quite well. And here's that mirror I was so keen to shoot. And the Cine Still is a lovely film to shoot in the dark. It's 800 ISO, so you can walk around handhold in almost any situation, and it works fantastically, giving us these incredible results. Now things got interesting. Now I had the Minolta 58mm on the adapter on the Nikon Z, so I could see if it was the glass or the sensor that was really giving the old-timey feel to the shots. And this is really interesting because although you can really spot a digital image a mile away because it's so crisp and so hyper real, the older glass gives something a little bit extra. It's a little bit like the hiss on a record, which although it's technically an imperfection compared to a digital recording, it adds something extra. So here we've got a little tiny bit of softness even though the image is absolutely crisp. It's really hard to put your finger on what exactly it is that isn't as perfect as a digital image, but it just has a certain hint of realness that a digital image doesn't, even though it's shot on a digital camera. But this 60-year-old lens has completely changed the feel. And it's a really curious thing. The modern lens, combined with the digital sensor, makes it all look so crisp and almost unnaturally real. Now we're fully up to date with the digital camera, modern lens. The colours are more punchy, more saturated. There just seems to be more everything going on. It seems almost hyper real compared to the older film cameras and film lenses, even on this body. I imagine as well as something to do with the crispness of the lens optics, there's something to do with the coatings as well affecting the colours. But of course now we're using fully digital, we can go into darker settings and longer exposures and higher ISO and really capture the world around us. Now we're getting to the actual comparison, and this is really interesting because taking virtually the same pictures but on completely different cameras, and suddenly everything looks just so different. This shot taken of the ship through the window of the terminal with the black and white Agfa, it looks again like it was shot in the interwar years, even though it's a new building and a new ship. But there's a feel to it. Virtually the same shot, but on the Nikon, suddenly it just looks and feels so massively different. It's bizarre. You're looking at the same thing, just presented to you slightly differently. And the atmosphere is utterly changed. Fascinating, just from the machine it was taken with. It gives us a different emotion. Then we've got the pool area at the back of the ship, a classic cruise ship image if you like. With the Nikon, of course, we've got the zoom lens, so we can go from 24 to 120. We can pick our perfect focal length for it, which is going to have an effect, but also it's a completely different image. Not just because I'm standing in a different place, but also the effect we get with the cine still. It feels like we're looking at a memory rather than the present day, even though it was shot on the same day. Now this is partly to do with the optics on the old Minolta, sort of a semi-early-ish zoom lens if you think about it. But the optics are so different, so we get a little bit of lens flare, which we don't really get so much with the newer lens. So the combination of the older lens with its older lens coatings and this particular film stock gives us a more muted look, which bring the colours a bit more rich, but without the saturation. But that's kind of where we are. We've got the deep reds and rich blues, but all just a little bit pastel muted. And even at night, with that 800 ASA, we can go in there and we can get something really quite sharp, just resting on the handrail of the ship, looking at this illuminated bridge. And we've got this brilliant blue colours. It's almost purple jumping out of the picture at you. Fantastic. And finally, of course, we've got the staircase. This is the grand lobby of the ship, which is the focal point of the ship, really. And again, with the new camera, we've got the richness and the brightness and the saturation just coming through so strongly. With the cine still, it looks like a more modern image. The muted tones, the bit of grain, it gives it the feel of being a bit longer ago, but somehow more human, more connected than the digital image. And finally, of course, the 1950s style image, which could also be a 30s or a 40s image. Things haven't really changed that much in terms of optical quality and the way the picture looks from anything from really the late 20s up until the 1950s. And with the right subject, even a brand new subject, this ship was only launched a couple of months ago, it looks like we've taken a picture decades ago. The same subject, but so different. Amazing. And finally, of course, we've got the new camera with the old lens. This is the most interesting in a way, because we haven't got the grain of the film. The grain gives us that texture, that depth. There is a certain, I guess, clinical look to digital images. They're always a little bit too clean, too perfect. This old lens, although there was one little drawback to using the adapter, and that was it didn't stop down. Everything was shot at f1.4, so everything is wide open. And that did mean if I was anywhere bright, I was limited purely to the shutter speed, which fortunately goes to 1/8000th on the Z6 II. Even though I'm processing these images through Photoshop with the same presets, it's coming out looking a little bit more muted, a little bit washed out, compared to the shots taken on the Z6 II with a different modern lens, a Z lens. So I suppose the conclusions we can draw is that yes, we can take ourselves back in time, find the right subject and find the right lens camera to match to it. Yes, it will take us back. Shoot on something like this from the 50s and it will take us back to the post-war years, and it will genuinely give us the look of a picture that was taken 70 plus years ago. What is interesting though is if you put the old lens on a brand new digital body, it does take you almost all of the way. We don't get the grain from the film, but we do get that different, softer, muted, interesting look. I think my favourite look from all of these though was the cine still on the Dynax, because that had enough modernity to be able to shoot in the dark, in the light, in any circumstances, whether it was a landscape or a street photography type thing, or a picture of the ship itself. There is a humanity, a real organicness about the shots from the Minolta. Of course, now what I want to go do is head back to Rotterdam City and find the Rotterdam, a 1960s ocean liner, which is now a hotel tied up in the port. A working older camera with a working 1960s lens, and go and walk around shooting that, because that will be a great day out. Let me know what you think of this. What do you think of my conclusions? What do you think of the pictures? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. This is a new channel. Hopefully we're going to grow fast, be able to do a lot more interesting and exciting things with photography, with cameras, with technique, all kinds of stuff. Like and subscribe, and join me again next time for more clickbaity photography. Goodbye.